What's up?
How are you today? Happy
Um,
Memorial Day.
I'm okay. Happy Sunday.
Yes. I hope everybody's doing well this Sunday. So, Alan, we've got a lot to cover today. So why don't we jump in? And today, as I mentioned to everyone, we're going to be talking about Style Masters, the inaugural exhibition at the museum. And it's actually a little bit of a crash course on graffiti. If you know nothing about graffiti, this is a wonderful opportunity for everyone to get familiar with the culture of writing, especially from your voice as the curator, the man behind this inaugural exhibition. And so, as people can see, when you walk into the museum, Alan, you chose a very powerful image of Flip One writing. And your title for the show was Style Masters, the Birth of the Graffiti Art Movement. And just to define that for folks in kind of layman's term, Merriam-Webster's dictionary says style to distinctive manner of expression as in writing or speech. Master, to become skilled or proficient in the use of. So usually at the museum when we talk about this story, and the term style masters, I always say something you don't really associate with children when they're young, correct? But this really is a story about children. So why don't we start there as we start talking about this culture?
Sure. So the exhibition starts, as you describe it, with that image and it has the text for the exhibition where we explain what this movement is, this movement of graffiti and of style writing, and who is represented in the exhibition. The image that you show of Martha Cooper and her photography of kids in the streets in New York City in the 70s really is part of a larger wall that showcases Martha Cooper's photography of children playing in the street. And the reason why I wanted us to have this sort of wall of imagery is to drive the point home that this is a youth art movement, that this is an art movement that was started by kids and teenagers in New York City and in other cities. But this is a movement of young people, so that the people that come into the space, the visitors to the museum, sort of start with the right orientation and start as anybody who lived through this era or who understands this would have started, which is looking at kids or being a kid, in the streets, kind of like having fun, as we see all those photos of those young people, the kids doing. And so Martha's images are just very important and very much poignant and tell the story of not just the kids, but also of the time that this art movement starts in New York City and in the conditions that the city happened to be in. So very important images, very beautiful images. And then you have images like this by John Narr, where you see layers and layers of writing, a hex tag there, Charmin 65 at the bottom. She was great. You see Cato and Gato and 1670. There's a lot of things going on there. A Nixon poster, and these images that John Narr was taking in 1973 showcase a city that has been completely taken over by signatures, but also they showcase older signatures. And so those tags, for the most part, are not from 73, but earlier, so 72, 71. Some of the writing on there goes back to the 60s. So it's a wonderful image, and we want to sort of show what the city looked like in those early days when this movement was still very young.
One thing that's notable about this photograph is that you have a really early Charmin 65 tag in the bottom that's legible. But if you go into, really look closer into the image, you see her name come up again in a distinctive style, which is Broadway elegant. And that's how we start you know, telling the story of style writing really is with a stylization of the name, a specific stylization, a terminology for the name, calling it Broadway elegant. And we have this picture by Jim Prigoff of a Top Cat 126 tag on a brick building, which illustrates that.
So it's an interesting it is an interesting and it's a great photo to have, and it's an interesting place for us to start. When you look at that photo by John Narn, you see that Charmin 65 tag done in this style, and there's other tags done in the same style, and then you see the Top Cat signature there. You can see what this style is about and how unique and hang on a second, guys, I lost you. Unique it is, and how very different it is from, let's say, the hex tag that was around, or the other Charmin 65 tag. You know, this is a signature that came from Philadelphia. Top Cat was a writer that was from Harlem and also from Philadelphia, and so he kind of went back and forth. But it was a style that was very much prevalent in New York City, and important from a developmental point of view. And you see it again here in the straight man signature at the bottom of this lava piece. And
Right.
so it was an elegant way to write one's name, and it was a very common way to write one's name in writers from Manhattan, and then of course writers from Philadelphia, as I mentioned.
Right. And given that it's Memorial Day, rest in peace, Straight Man, who we recently lost.
Yes.
And here you created this wonderful display, which I really like a lot, with the tools of the trade, and these beautiful signatures on loose leaf paper, which illustrate to me that, yeah, this was a young kid in school who was just practicing his tag style. And of course, there's the New York Magazine, I believe that is there. Tell me about this display and what this represents.
So in this display, you have early signatures, you have some of the writing tools that were used by the kids back then, some of those markers, the uni-wide, the mini-wide, the magic markers, the pilots. So you get a wide range of these writing instruments. And then you have this article by New York Magazine that gives out awards to some of the best writing, and I think they named it the Tacky Awards. And so what you see is, you know, early style writing in these signatures, and then you see some of the writing on the trains that are in this piece by 1973. There's also a very important photograph there by Jack Stewart of a super cool 223 piece, who has been credited as doing the first masterpiece on the side of a train. But these early signatures that you see here by artists like Kindu or by Victor 161, who has that loose leaf paper with all those names, and he's sort of writing his friend's name, really showcase the practice that was going into writing, and also the uniqueness of each of these teenagers writing their name. Everybody was trying to write their name in their own unique way. And so we, you know, in this case, we wanted to showcase these tools and sort of just what it meant to be a kid and have these markers and practice and write, and how even the adults by 73 started to pay attention and realize that there was something really wonderful and different happening on the streets and on the trains, as you
Yeah,
can see here.
and notably, there were no spray cans in the case because kids were writing mostly with markers. But then eventually, the spray can became one of the big innovations of graffiti, of being able to tag your name out in front of the train. And what's really wonderful, I found this picture, and the names on it, the Redbird train with Super Cool 223, Stay High, and Hondo, and Miko, and Sweet Soul. Is wonderful. And again, this is also primitive in a way. But one thing that's very distinct about this is that the signature of Stay High, really what became a branding for Stay High. That didn't change since the 70s. It became so iconic. to him, you know, and the idea of creating a brand, a signature brand, right? That was something that we started seeing early on, no?
I missed that.
In terms of the tags, I was talking about Stay High, about him creating a signature brand for himself. In terms that his signature never really changed. It became his brand, and that writers got really hip to that, about the repetition of the signature style.
With every writer's signature becomes their brand. And so Stay High, much like Miko there or Super Cool 223, um, you know, that's what we do. We create a name for ourselves, and then we learn how to write it, and then we repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat, and eventually we master it, and it looks as elegant and as beautiful as the one that you see there, the Stay High 149 with his portrait,
Yep.
really well executed, with his his smoker icon and the stars and his crew, the ex Vandals. So it's but this is what that's a lifetime of writing, uh, for that signature to look like that for him, even though it looked like that probably in 1975 and same thing in 2015.
Well, one of the interesting things I've always found about Stay High was that he really was kind of everyone's hero at one point, and then he disappeared. But in terms of his signature, he really was one of the first to bring in a pop iconography into it, with the stick figure, which he kind of lifted from the television program The Saint. And that was really distinct on him so early on, to be pulling from popular culture, to bring in the stick figure. But also in an innovation of tagging was the multicolored uni-wide. We see the Voice of the Ghetto tag with the multicolored uni-wide, again, creating this other element for style writing. And then later on, you see Quick doing it.
Yeah, the what's interesting is, and we point this out in the museum, is once there's this discovery or this innovation by some of these young writers, let's say Stay High with the two-tone marker that you see there, everybody wants to do the same thing. And and so that's the use of the saint character, the stick figure that you see there, and he's modified it and given it a cigarette or a joint, and it's smoking. For a long time, many writers had stick figure characters next to it. So Lava 1 and 2 had one that had a top hat, or no, had a crown. His had a crown
Hmm.
on it. And so many writers, I think, who was it? Who's Stay High's cousin? Deadleg 167 had one with a top hat. And so there were many writers that used this sort of stick figure. And I remember practicing, stick figure, myself in high school and wanting to have one, just like I saw, Doc from TC5 had one, and other people used this for decades.
So in the museum, you have a big collection of signatures. How many have you collected so far, do you think?
I have hundreds and hundreds of these signatures on canvas boards, and when we have, I think, about 24 of them on display in the museum. I wanted to show different sort of generations of writers and signatures that were very unique, and also some that of writers that no longer are living. And so, in that particular image that you see there, that very first row at the top, which is partial view of the whole, the display shows first generation writers, or at least first few years of the art movement. So you see Miko, LSD, Ohm, Blade, and Amaral. And then the next row below it are writers that might have come maybe a year or two after. So by 73, these other tags start to appear: Wasp 1, AIM 1, Dime 139, and Fuzz 1. And then by, 74, you start to see names like Part 1 TDS, and then others like Roto and Team and BT. And then as you get into the late 70s and into the early 80s, you see KC and Strike and Lace and Min One. And so it's a, many generations of writers, but what I also wanted to point out is the different types of style that exist. And so and also the uniqueness of these artists and their handwriting. If you look at Dime 139, which is the signature that is second row and third column in blue, it's a very unique, almost like a Broadway elegant style. And then if you look at something like Team underneath it, it looks almost like a script style. And so there's all these different styles that were being introduced and people trying to master it and be unique and be their own and work and work and work to have not only be respected amongst their peers by putting them up a lot, but also just have the respect from having good hand style. And these are some of those names. Rodo that you see there on the left of Team and BT on the right of Team. These guys got up a lot. Their names were everywhere. Above BT, it's a Fuzz 1 tag, and below BT is a Min 1 tag. Those guys were kings of the insides, and they wrote their names thousands and thousands of times.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to point out for the viewers is that when you look at some of these names, you'll see two distinct things as well. It are the numbers, like maybe Wasp 1, maybe he was the first one, right? Or Dime 139, 139 could have been the street that he was growing up on. But also you start seeing crews, right? TR, the Rebels with LSD tag, and Go Club with Team. So it was very common for writers to put up their crew, so to speak, and
Right,
also
their crew was their affiliation, and so I mean that's a good point that you bring up. In many of these, you'll see them. So at the very top, you see Ex Vandals, which we saw Stay High right before. Underneath that, the Fuzz 1 tag has Ted Inc., which stood for the Ebony Dukes. At the very bottom on the right, Min 1 puts RTW, as does Strike in the middle there. And then Part puts up TDS, Lates puts up 357, AIM puts up SSB. So these are groups of writers from all over for the city. And so some of these groups are from Manhattan, some of these groups are from the Bronx or from Brooklyn. But, writers, as you mentioned, would get together and go out and write together or paint together. And there was a camaraderie, and that camaraderie turned writers into having crews. I think the oldest two crews that you saw in those photos, first off in New York City, the Ebony Dukes, which Fuzz puts up, Ted Inc., is one of the oldest, if not the very oldest, Bronx writing crew, very first of the Bronx writing crews. And above it, Ex Vandals is the very first, or possibly the very first writing crew from Brooklyn. And so, within these boards, you get not only the history of these artists, but a little bit of the history, deeper dive into these groups and into the history of the movement.
And of course, application on the train. This is a photo of the 80s, and one can see how much style has changed by this point. And then, of course, the proliferation of signatures. And I think this is emblematic of what people thought New York was in the 80s.
I love this. I love the way, most people, I guess, did not like this, or many people did not like this, but I love this. When I took the train to school, this is what the trains looked like, and I was fascinated by the names. There were so many of them, and you would see who was very active and who was prolific, and who knew how to use a marker and who did not know how to use a marker, who had good ink and good markers, and who was
Also
a
who was
toy.
affiliated with each other, right? You get to figure that
Sure.
out.
Sure, who wrote with who and who just went bombing because it might be brand new signatures. And so I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed writing uh, different kind of train lines and seeing the different writers on different train lines because it wasn't so typical to see writers on every single train line. The six train from the Bronx might have had a
Hmm.
group of artists, and they might never make it over to the one train, a different train line. And so there was history on just certain train lines that didn't cross over. And then of course there was very special group of riders that rode on many train lines or on all the train lines, and they stood out amongst their peers for being what we used to call all city, because they were really trying to be the most famous and they were the most prolific amongst all their peers.
To your point of masterpieces, the signature in the early days became the masterpiece. We have this in our exhibition, and this is such an important photograph because it shows innovation, the Staff 161 nonstop.
This Staff 161 was the president of the Ebony Dukes that I mentioned to you earlier. And this particular style, a bit of a marshmallow kind of a style, done in 72, is is wonderful. It's only done in two colors, but he's not even just writing his name, he's writing his name and a slogan nonstop. You see how it eclipses everything else around it. Everything else around it are very small tags, probably painted while the train was still in service and the kids were on the platform, and they're very small. Some of them with markers, most of them with paint. But here, Staff 161 goes much bigger, fills in his name very large, and sends a message. And I love this image. This is an image by Keith Bow, who loaned us some great images to present this era in the museum.
So this piece, I because I don't know dates per se, did this predate Phase's innovation of Bubble Softy?
It's around the same time, it's around the same time. I mean, Phase, one of the things to consider is, in these early days, things were happening so fast. Things are changing from day to day to day. But Phase was, very much one of the early practitioners, but he wasn't the first. And there were writers before him, and he was put on by writers. He was put on by Bonanza, who I believe was his cousin, who took him out. And so there was already a movement before Phase. But what Phase did is he joined, really early on. By 71, he was writing, and so he was there during the signature era. But he started adding to it and building upon it. And he was known for being an innovator of style. And we can see that when we look and trace back his work, we can see how he was innovating. And when we speak to people that were there, I mean, Faze unfortunately now has passed away, but when you would speak to him, and when you speak to people that were there during those early days, Faze was giving people style. Faze was helping others out, and either selling styles or helping you out by giving you styles, because he was that good at letter shaping and letter manipulation.
We also have this one with Bot and Atom, and these are two distinctive styles. I believe, again, given the display we had, the Bot's probably more of a platform style because of the wide bottom, right?
It is, and I don't think that all these styles fit neatly into classification. I think that they're modified. I believe that this is bot 707 from TFP Crew from the Bronx. Next to it is Adam 12 from the Ebony Dukes, who happens to be Staff 161's brother. And then to the right of it is SIP 156, no, SIP 56. I'm guessing part of the 56 boys, who looks like he was painting with Bot. They shared the same yellow and purple outline. And here you see, this is 1973, and things are happening. The letters are moving and growing, and you can see that A looks like it came from maybe the Broadway elegant style, but the D is becoming more of a script style and looping into an arrow. And so styles are clashing, styles are blending, and these young artists are creating their own way, uh, and trying to figure it out.
What have you found out about the inclusion of the arrow? Who can own that innovation to graffiti
The
style writing?
the the phase two is the one that said that he started it, but do we know? We weren't there when there's some really good documentation. Some people really cared and really paid attention to this. Phase is the one that said he is the first person to introduce the arrow, but if he introduced it on a Tuesday, by Friday everybody was using it. So it
Hmm.
was happening that quick. When I started doing research on the topic, uh, I came across Jack Stewart's book, and I forgot what it was called, but I have it somewhere around here. So, in the 90s, or I came across Jack Stewart's Thesis, and Jack Stewart was a muralist, and he was getting his PhD from NYU, and he had been studying subway graffiti since the early 70s. And I discovered by doing some library search his thesis. His thesis um, was called, let's see what it's called. It was something like Subway Graffiti, an aesthetic study of graffiti on the subway system of New York City from 1970 to 1978. And so I ordered it. It wasn't a bound book. I had to order it and wait like a month or two to get this delivered to me. When I finally got it, I asked folks to sign it. Look, even you signed it. You got a signature here from the 90s, Carlos, from 95, actually. And either you signed it or your brother signed it for you. But he did wonderful work because from 1970 he was taking photographs and writing notes and interviewing the young writers and asking them questions and making observations. So when Hondo painted a candy cane piece, he noted it. Today, Hondo painted a candy cane piece. Uh, and then next week, oh, there's three more candy cane pieces that are being painted now. It seems like Hondo's idea took off, you know? And so it was really interesting to read this in 95. And years later, this would become, Jack Stewart has since passed, and his wife Regina put out a book called Graffiti Kings, and many years later. And so, yeah, I have a good shirt on. It's a Flip shirt right there. And what's up, Flip? And it's an important book. And you see, back when I first got it, the pictures are in black and white. But if anybody's interested, you can still find the Graffiti Kings book. It's not so easy to find. It's a great piece of literature and a great piece of history. And of course, Jack was Jack, and he had his point of view and his analysis. And some people dispute some of it, some people accept it, some people dispute it. Um, but it's a great place to start. And so for me, it was a great place to start for some of this research. The Dove 2 there that you see, um, I'm not sure that it's in this book or that it made this book, but that Dove 2 is by Riff 170, and that's from 1973, if I'm correct.
Yeah, this piece is really interesting because it's a response. It's a response piece, right? It's a challenge piece, and you could see it was for Pell, and he's saying, "Dig me, we've got the best nonetheless." And tell us more about this piece, why you chose this for the exhibition.
Well, for one, it's a beautiful top to bottom, and so for many many years, um, images like this have been missing, right? They just haven't been around. And the past 10 years, books have started to come out, put out by photographers that happened to be there for an assignment and took some photos. And some writers have assembled some really great books. And so now we're getting access to some of these images. This image is by Robert Browning, I believe. It's either by Robert Browning or by Keith Bow. But when I saw this image, I thought it was a wonderful image. The train is sitting in the yard. It's a top to bottom. The windows are still painted, which is exceptional. You know, they got painted or got cleaned very quickly. And so I was very curious, and the style is such a great style and so well executed. It's got a 3D, it's got designs. The designs have outlines. It's really well done. Proportions are great. It's clean. It's really clean. And so when I saw this, um, I had to talk to Riff about it, you know, and I spoke to him about it, and I happened to show him this this dime two piece, and it blew him away. He was like, "Wow, I haven't seen that." He hadn't seen this picture ever. And when I showed him the dime two, he's like, "Look, I dedicated this to Dime, which is Pell, Pell 139, because he was my friend and one of my students. We had given him style, and Pell was getting good, and Pell painted this dime two piece, and I wanted to burn him and let him know that I was still the master and I was still the one, you know, I was still, you know, better. And so there was this dialogue created between Pell 139 painting dime two with the letter D, a name with the letter D, and then Riff 170 coming back with a piece also written with the letter D, a name with the letter D, Dove 2. So this exchange I thought was a wonderful exchange, but that was happening, right? There was that kind of a competition that was going on between these young writers for dominance, for bragging rights, to say that I'm the best. And he says that I'm the best nonetheless, right? You know, there was this competition, and, you know, everybody wanted to be fly, everybody wanted to be tough, everybody wanted to be
Yeah.
noticed. And so this was a great way to get noticed. Go out, drop a beautiful top to bottom, say that you're the baddest, and let the world know.
I mean, style innovation in that period, it's interesting because it wasn't just style innovation, it was also design innovation. They're discovering new ways of painting. And this one is, I think, really special because it's really like three colors.
I love this piece. This is a blade done with Billy 167, and this is 1975. And you know, Blade is 18 years old when he paints this. It is only three colors, but this blade is so funky. The letters look like they're bouncing on the train. That E, the way it bends and curls, and it has that foot kicking up, or the back of the B going out, and it looks almost like it's a C, but it's just this big fat hook. Um, and it's again, it's only three colors. It's the right three colors. You're right. You know, Persuade says it's so much movement. There is so much movement. He adds the lines in the red 3D to make it look like there's movement, to give the perception of movement even when it's standing still. And this to me is just pure funk. This is pure style.
Yeah.
Blade at 18 years old is one of the kings of graffiti. This is 1975. Perhaps his only competition at the time, real competition, would be someone like Cliff 159,
Hmm.
or even his own crew, his partners, people like Comet that he was painting with. But you know, you look at 75 and you look at the images, him, Cliff 159, the trains that they were doing, the whole cars were amazing, really on another level. And yeah, and this one was with Billy 167. So we don't have the Billy photo here, but I just think that
Yeah.
this is some of the best.
Yeah, and I have a Billy picture that I picked up for this conversation. In particular, this slide with an early Riff, a Worm piece, a Tracy, a Peanut 2, and a Billy. Just even, I don't know the dates on these pieces, but again, they're not too far off from that
This
blade
is
to
this
give you an
is
idea of how fast this was developing.
Yeah, I mean, these are a little bit, these are, you know, these are a few different years. I think the Worm might be 73, you know, the Billy might be, I think, 76, the Tracy might be around 75. The Peanut, I'm not sure, but it's right in there, probably 74 if I were to guess. Um, but these are all kings of the train era of the movement. And when you look at Riff and the Worm, it's four colors, and he's doing all these designs. When you look at Peanut 2, just like Tracy and even like Riff, they're using the train to sort of line up their letters. They're not falling off. That Billy 167 on the bottom right was done with Lee Quinones of the Fabulous Five. And so that was a very special
Yeah.
train that you pulled out there.
Yeah, and
And so a lot of innovation.
Yeah, Lee himself was a style master first before he was doing the big mural trains.
Yeah, yeah. The Lee here is 1976. And so again, this has great movement and great funk. It's, the way that the E's are overlapping each other and bending around the that trident sticking out of the back of the E and the L, and just how they connect. A great piece, not a lot of colors,
No.
not too many colors. This piece is when I saw this piece, it blew me away. So I'm used to seeing Lee's whole cars with messages, but this is just such an excellent piece of writing. And this was on probably done in Brooklyn or done in Manhattan, but on train lines that went to Brooklyn. And this photo is by Don One, another style master. So in the museum, we go through this evolution of style with these quick snapshots and of images. And so we have the Lee, and then we also show this Don One piece that you see there, where he writes, "Mr. Don One, a legend well lived, 73 to 76, goodbye." And he basically announces his retirement from the graffiti movement. He's painted for 3 to 4 years already. He's done. He's about 18 years old, and he's ready to be a grown up and move on with civilian life and leave it behind. And so you see the Don, another beautiful style piece with the self portrait for the letter O, and his cloud is the cloud that's coming out of the car that he's painted to the right of the train. So again, this is pretty much one entire train car from one end to the other end, and wonderfully executed.
Well,
Again, not a lot of colors, but the letters are so strong and so wild. You see these arrows popping off, in different directions, and his end, the way it curls and bends, and he really just nailed it. And with the cloud, the cloud has this cartoon effect with this black stipple, so you get to really think that this is like a car's dirty cloud, right?
yeah, that. But to me, it also it's kind of this one has a lot of to me suggests the that he was a young kid looking at comic books and cartoons and the like. But the other thing that's really important to me for Don, because now I'm reading the Don One book by Louis K.R. Gasparo, is that Don had phenomenal penmanship. You have a black book in a display where he's got one of his drawings, but one thing he's an exceptional draftsman, but his you can see here on the cloud how exceptional his handwriting was.
Well,
He,
it was necessary to do that, right? It was necessary and part of the movement to be able to do it. Someone writes 80s characters were dope. Yeah, but this is 1976. We're not even in the 80s yet, and the characters are so dope, you know? And so yeah, the hand styles were very important.
and
You know,
that
you
that
so
right, and that would what's interesting is because that hand style would go on to influence a lot of the writers from Manhattan and the Bronx. And following this, a few years later, some of the greatest style masters start to come onto the scene. Part being one of them, and Chain, and Dondi and Kel, all had exceptional hand style, but they were building on style in a whole different manner. You start to see, although Part has more of the early 70s influences, in this one Part piece, he and Chain, who were painting partners, you could see how advanced Chain was. by the night 1979, I believe that was, or 78,
Well,
with the five speeds.
again, not a lot of colors. The part piece that says TDS part, great piece. Underneath it, you see the Dondi and the Kel, a little bit more advanced as far as their use of color. But all these guys could burn no colors, a little bit of colors. You see 78, 79. This is a really interesting time where while style is changing, it's becoming more of a mechanical style. You see these styles like what Chain is doing with his five piece there, with these connections, sort of like it looks like pipes, and then Kel introducing what he would eventually turn into, and him and Dondi would turn into a machine style, more with more arrows jutting out, and adding to what their predecessors, what their heroes really, which here you have TDS crew on the top left, and then on the right you have TMT crew, even though Chain was from TDS first, and then you have CIA and Rock at the bottom. These are different crews, all trying to be the best and do the best work. There was the point of this whole thing was to become a style master, to master lettering and master it on the side of a train. And when you look at this Dondi, this Kel, all these pieces, they did it. Like it's undeniable that
Yeah,
these people
the that
achieved it.
period, if I could speak to this period where Dondi and Kel, um, and even before we met Dondi, we were looking at TMT and TDS, Mafia, not of course, Knock 167, OTB. Those guys from the Bronx were and Manhattan were the great style masters. We were like, how do we become that good? And then again, how do we challenge them? And I think Kel and Dondi uh, responded to TMT and TDS in a phenomenal way because their productions were a response to, uh, and, and and
Correct.
and it was not unusual when like TDS would do a car with all the names that are start with W, that Kel, Duro, and Kel would do W names. And again, that's part of learning, but also challenging the kings, so to speak.
And also keeping a tradition going, because before that Riff was doing that, right? So when you see Riff starting with and not just Riff and Bama, they start doing worm pieces, and then other people start doing worm pieces, and then someone does a warm piece, and some does they change these letters, but there's a tradition of showcasing style and saying, look, there can be many people that are writing this one name. It doesn't belong to anybody, but because we want to show that we're adding to this tradition and we're part of this tradition. So I think was a wonderful practice to see people swap names, to see people share names. Kel might do a bus piece, but then he gave the bus name to Dondi. Part might do, his Worm 2 piece. Part did a lot of beautiful Worm 2 pieces, but there were worms before it, but it was in keeping with that tradition. And I love that Part is on here right now. Flip One is on here right now. These guys could tell us directly. I've been talking to these guys for a very long time, taking notes and really trying to uh, document this history, get the photos, get the drawings, get the stories together. So this exhibition that we're talking about, the Style Masters exhibition, is a culmination of work and my love for this movement, but in trying to preserve the history of this movement, so that the information that I've been able to receive from um, these pioneers and these elders in the movement would be passed along to others, and so we can keep this history alive and the knowledge alive. You see this wall here, these trains are all from 1980 and 1981, and they're great trains. From the left you see Cult and Blade and Scene and Kel and Futura and Zephyr, FBA crew, Dez and Scheme and Case 2, and seeing TC5 and Rasta and T-Kid and Min and Attack. They're great pieces. And so when you come into the museum and you see this wall, we can talk about these men and women who were
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah.
Before we saw Blade at 18, 5 years later, he's doing these whole cars, the Deep that's on the left, the swinging letters on the right. This is now a 23-year-old, a 23-year-old man who's risking life and limb and arrest to go paint in the tunnels to create these works, to show that he's an incredible muralist, an incredible painter to the whole city. He wants everybody to read his letters and everybody to understand who he is. And he was, one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah. And what's nice about this wall, I mean, there's so many great stories and anecdotes with all these pieces, like the Des piece, the crime in the city, where all of a sudden, the writers are speaking to the public, right? Because that was such a challenging time for any young kid to live in a crime-ridden city, and that's part one of another car that says that I think it's too much damn crime in the
Well, no,
city.
that one's a two-man car. It says all you see is,
All you see is
and
right,
then
correct.
crime in the
Thank you.
city. And it wasn't just that they were saying that about the city. They were saying that about themselves, that they were being mistreated and misrepresented in
Yeah,
the media, and that graffiti is being seen as a crime, and that's all you see. You don't see the beauty and the art that's behind this. And let's not forget these people, these writers that you see here, they were doing this to make the city more beautiful, to make the trains more beautiful. They weren't trying to destroy the trains. They were trying to maybe destroy the trains using that street language, by destroying them, meaning, obliterate them with style. But they weren't trying to destroy them physically. They were trying to beautify the trains, and they did. I mean, these trains look much better with this work on it than plain Jane without it.
right. And interestingly, after this period, again, this is the Style War era. All these magnificent productions uh, would eventually either get buffed by the train buff, the acid wash. But then we had the infamous war with MPC, with Cap and guys writing throw-ups and going over them. And that would just change the face of graffiti culture in this period. But the throw-up is such an important thing to discuss. And I included some of these, again, some infamous, there's so many great throw-up legends. On this slide, we have In, who was perhaps the most up writer of his generation. Blade would contest it, but he recognizes that he was super up, all-time king. Fuzz One, and another all-city king. Jester DY, another king. And of course, Is the Wiz, another king. And so the throw-up, let's talk about the throw-up and the function of the throw-up.
So the throw up is very important. I personally love throw ups, and I come from a crew that love throw ups, and we painted a lot of throw ups personally. The throw up is an early innovation. It became a sort of quote unquote weapon, uh, used by artists to paint quickly and repetitively, to take over the train lines and make themselves well known. And so you could do one piece and spend 3 hours on a panel or an hour on a panel, or you could spend that time walking up and down the train lanes doing throw up after throw up after throw up. And instead of doing one thing, do many pieces, many throw ups. And so it was a way to get up. It was a way to get known and get recognized. In this grouping of pictures here on the top left, you have OE3 from my neighborhood, Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I love those throw ups.
Can we stop on OE for a second, because he was
Yeah.
very distinct. Uh, I think he was one of the first writers that I had seen to use character features in his O. He gave them personality. His
I,
letters.
I love that about him, and the other guy that I love that used to do that was Quick from
Yeah,
RTW. I would say maybe Quick earlier, since Quick is an older writer, then OE. But these are writers again from the 70s. You have OE, you have Hayes, you have Zephyr with the Joy Throps, and you have Pate and Emmy, which is men. Really well executed throw-ups. But this all comes from, like you mentioned before, uh, and the guys that he rolled with, eventually becoming Top Crew. Top Crew from Brooklyn was a crew that went out and painted lots of throw-ups that were to use in them to dominate the train lines. And it became a bit of a competition with writers from Brooklyn and writers from the Bronx, because people were trying to dominate the train lines. There you see me doing, a version of a throw up, many, many years later. But again, it comes from this tradition of throw ups from Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. And it doesn't stop. And throw ups, when you look at throw ups in the city today, they're everywhere, and these throw ups that you see here, J.A., who's probably the most prolific writer in New York City's history. And then you have one of our partners, V for V Fresh on the top right, and one of my old writing partners, Ghost, on the bottom, who all were known for painting throw-ups and all known for painting trains and streets and sort of all around doing all of it. And again, these were like the little soldiers. The tags are the little soldiers. This is the next wave of artillery that we would put out. And the image that you show there of that train with Ghost with JA tags, I was on that car as well. This is now going into 1989, 1990. The city has cleaned up the trains, and so we reverted to doing less colorful stuff, using throw-ups and tags as a tool to take back the trains and try to make the trains run with graffiti on it again. Duel One, someone mentions, also had a great throw up and would love to do them. And so the throw up is an important part of the movement because you take up space and you do it to dominate the train lines, which we all want to dominate.
I have to say, as a, one of the things early on for me and my crew, we had some good throw up bombers, of course, on our crew, Duro, Min, Satch, and all these guys. But I was kind of at first impartial to throw ups. Other than the legends like In and Vinny and some of those guys, Dean and stuff like that, there was a period of no innovation, and now they're wildly innovative and amazing. That throw ups on themselves so legitimately in their own, just as tagging now and style writing and throw ups, each have so like distinct legitimacy as an art form on their own.
I agree. There's really, really great throw-ups now. It's really its own thing. And basically this throw-up is a throwback to the early bubble styles of phase two, the early bubble styles of, people like Blade. But it's hard to compete with throw-up writers. If a throw-up writer is only, doing these, and you're doing pieces, you can't compete with the throw-up writers. They're just going to blast right through you. And so, there's competition, and it's tough. And throw-up writers were very much knew how to stretch their paint. And many of the pictures that you see here, they're filled in very misty. And they really came handy with these graffiti wars that you mentioned before, like with MPC crew or other crews. Throw-ups were useful for that. People that are mentioned here. I see people mentioning Cope 2. He bombed hard with throw-ups, and he got his throw-up from Cap that you mentioned before from MPC crew. So there's a whole tradition there. But let's move on to, we don't even cover throw-ups really in the museum other than Ghost and Giz. They have a room dedicated to the throw-up where they really stretch what it is to do throw-ups as an art form.
Correct. So I want to just let everybody know that this is actually, because the presentation's a bit longer, that this is part one, and we're closing in on an hour already. So I want to let you know to hang tight. We're going to sign off and sign back in, because there's still more to come in this conversation with Alan KET, who's the co-founder and curator at the Museum of Graffiti. And our second part will pick up in a second where we left off. So I'll be back
And
on.
and thanks everybody for joining us today to talk about, the work that we're doing at the museum and talk about this history. What's the next slide there, Carlos?
The next section is the drawings.
So, okay, so the next section's of drawings. Do you want to do the drawings together, or do you want to do the drawings on your own?
Um, no, I think we could do it. I think again, your point of view on all this is very important in terms of the curation. So what we could do is save the second part of this because it'll run honestly another hour, the conversation at our pace.
Yeah, we're kind of slow guys, and we get too
You're
hyped
kind of
talking about
slow.
this stuff, and I have a lot of
No,
information
I
to
appreciate,
share.
yeah, I
You know,
appreciate your detail and your scholarship on all this. It's so invaluable to this conversation.
so
I would
why don't we do this? I don't have a lot of time. It
so
is
let's do a part two.
7:57. I have to put the kids to bed soon, but give me like one or two more of these slides so we can just talk about it,
Um,
and keep it going. Just pick.
you have 3 minutes.
Let's do it.
Okay, so again, everything starts on paper for writers, all of us, and we have a great selection. You have an awesome selection of both early drawings to more contemporary drawings.
So this is a wall of about 45 drawings from dating back from 1973 and on. What else you got?
This is one of the
So
drawings part.
so this drawing I love. Part who's on here right now listening to us. Maybe Part wants to do part two of this talk, and he can get us through some of these drawings. But this one I love because you see the different styles on notebook paper, on school paper, and you see him practicing and different letter P's. You even see his brother in there, Jack. So I love it just because it's practice, and practice makes perfect.
You have 1 minute. Oh,
This is
Pell.
another this
This
is
is a
another
great.
letter P. This is Pell, but this is done by Cos 207. This was painted in 1979 on the one train, and it's a great piece. It's a style that you can see the P that Part showed in the drawing before, and this P, they're related. That P with the colors there, the way that those two in the center and causes P, those P's are related. They come from the same place. They're a family, and so I love that there's this traditional style, and they're adding to it and adding to it. So here you see Pell, or actually Cause, taking Pell 139's name and using some of
Right.
Part's style and updating it and making it his own.
So Alan, in the final seconds, I want to thank you again. I think we're going to revisit this presentation again, the final leg of it. This is part one, folks, of Style Masters. It's been a fantastic presentation, Alan. I really appreciate your time with us today. And again, we'll reschedule this and run through it again.
Yes, thank you, Carlos, and thank you.